Guten Tag. Welcome back to Fire Hose, a podcast of Our Redeemer Lutheran, bringing you solid Christian doctrine at 1,000 PSI. I am and remain your humble servant, Peter Heckert, Associate Pastor here at OR. And today, we're going to be continuing our look at the foundational Reformation document, the one that kicked everything off. And we started looking at it last week, the 95 Theses. And we got through Theses 51, if I remember correctly, in that episode. Now, if you haven't watched that episode, if you haven't listened to it, I would recommend going back and doing that, checking that out first. Otherwise, some of the stuff that we're talking about today may not make a whole lot of sense. For those of you who did your homework, who have already checked out that first episode, and of course I speak in jest. Please, first of all, leave your thoughts and comments in the comments section. And if you'd like to, you could also send us feedback via email, podcast@orlctosa.org. But I also wanted to, before we get started, ask a question. When you were listening to the episode last week, when you were listening to those first 51 theses that Martin Luther wrote for debate, did anything sound a little bit off to you? Did your Lutheran ears itch a little bit as you were listening? Did you have little red flags that were popping up in your mind as you heard what the Reverend Dr. Luther wrote? Well, I can tell you that there is a perfectly reasonable explanation for that.
That is, I'm sure there's a very reasonable...
But I'm not going to talk about it right now. We'll talk about it later, after we finish off the document itself. So with that in mind, I want you to get ready and hang on to your teeth, people, because we are charging the line. Starting at Theses 52. The assurance of salvation by letters of pardon is vain, even though the commissary, nay, even the Pope himself, were to stake his soul upon it. They are enemies of Christ and of the Pope, who bid the word of God be altogether silent in some churches, in order that pardons may be preached in others. Injury is done the word of God, when in the same sermon, an equal or a longer time is spent on pardons than on this word. It must be the intention of the Pope that if pardons, which are a very small thing, are celebrated with one bell, with single processions and ceremonies, then the gospel, which is the very greatest thing, should be preached with 100 bells, 100 processions, 100 ceremonies. The treasures of the church, out of which the Pope grants indulgences, are not sufficiently named or known among the people of Christ. That they are temporal treasures is certainly evident, for many of the vendors do not pour out such treasures so easily, but only gather them. Nor are they the merits of Christ and the saints, for even without the Pope, they always work grace for the inner man and the cross, death, and hell of the outward man. St. Lawrence said that the treasures of the church were the church's poor, but he spoke according to the usage of the word in his own time. Without rashness, we say that the keys of the church, given by Christ's merit, are that treasure. For it is clear that for the remission of penalties and of reserved cases, the power of the Pope is of itself sufficient. The true treasure of the church is the most holy gospel of the glory and the grace of God. But this treasure is naturally most odious, for it makes the first to be the last. On the other hand, the treasure of indulgences is naturally most acceptable, for it makes the last to be first. Therefore, the treasures of the gospel are nets with which they formerly were wont to fish for men of riches. The treasures of the indulgences are nets with which they now fish for the riches of men. The indulgences, which the preachers cry as the greatest graces, are known to be truly such, insofar as they promote gain. Yet they are in truth the very smallest graces compared with the grace of God and the piety of the cross. Bishops and curates are bound to admit the commissaries of apostolic pardons with all reverence. But still more are they bound to strain all their eyes and attend with all their ears, lest these men preach their own dreams instead of the commission of the Pope. He who speaks against the truth of apostolic pardons, let him be anathema and accursed. But he who guards against the lust and license of the pardon preachers, let him be blessed. The Pope justly thunders against those who, by any art, contrive the injury of the traffic in pardons. But much more does he intend to thunder against those who use the pretext of pardons to contrive the injury of holy love and truth. To think the papal pardons so great that they could absolve a man even if he had committed an impossible sin and violated the Mother of God. This is madness. We say, on the contrary, that the papal pardons are not able to remove the very least of venial sins, so far as its guilt is concerned. It is said that even St. Peter, if he were now Pope, could not bestow greater graces. This is blasphemy against St. Peter and against the Pope. We say, on the contrary, that even the present Pope, and any Pope at all, has greater graces at his disposal, to wit, the gospel, powers, gifts of healing, etc., as it is written in 1 Corinthians 12. To say that the cross emblazoned with the papal arms, which is set up by the preachers of indulgences, is of equal worth with the cross of Christ is blasphemy. The bishops, curates, and theologians who allow such talk to be spread among the people will have an account to render. This unbridled preaching of pardons makes it no easy matter, even for learned men, to rescue the reverence due to the Pope from slander, or even from the shrewd questioning of the laity. To wit, why does not the Pope empty purgatory for the sake of holy love, and of the dire need of the souls that are there, if he redeems an infinite number of souls for the sake of miserable money with which to build the church? The former reasons would be most just. The latter is most trivial. Again, why are mortuary and anniversary masses for the dead continued, and why does he not return or permit the withdrawal of the endowments founded on their behalf, since it is wrong to pay for the redeemed? Again, what is this new piety of God and the Pope, that for money they allow a man who is impious and their enemy to buy out of purgatory the pious soul of a friend of God, and do not, rather, because of that pious and beloved soul's own need, free it for pure love's sake? Again, why are the penitential canons, long since in actual fact and through disuse abrogated and dead, now satisfied by the granting of indulgences as though they were still alive and in force? Again, why does not the Pope, whose wealth is today greater than the riches of the richest, build just this one church of St. Peter with his own money, rather than with the money of poor believers? Again, what is it that the Pope remits, and what participation does he grant to those who, by perfect contrition, have a right to full remission and participation? Again, What greater blessing could come to the church than if the Pope were to do 100 times a day what he does now once, and bestow on every believer these remissions and participations? Since the Pope, by his pardons, seeks the salvation of souls rather than money, why does he suspend the indulgences and pardons granted heretofore, since these have equal efficacy? To repress these arguments and scruples of the laity by force alone, and not to resolve them by giving reasons, is to expose the Church and the Pope to the ridicule of their enemies, and to make Christians unhappy. If, therefore, pardons were preached according to the spirit and mind of the Pope, all these doubts would be readily resolved. Nay, they would not exist. Away then with all those prophets who say to the people of Christ, peace, peace, and there is no peace. Blessed be all those prophets who say to the people of Christ, cross, cross, and there is no cross. Christians are to be exhorted that they be diligent in following Christ, their head, through penalties, deaths, and hell, and thus be confident of entering into heaven rather than through many tribulations, than through the assurance of peace. Well, that's it. That's it. Between that last episode and this one, you have just heard in fullness the document that set Europe ablaze back in the 16th century. The document that dictated how subsequent centuries would turn out. So what'd you think? Did you hear some things in there that raised additional red flags? Did you hear something that made you think, well, that didn't sound particularly Lutheran? It sounded kind of Catholic. Right. Because it is. It's important to remember that when he wrote this, Luther was not a Lutheran, as we sort of understand that moniker today. No, he was still a medieval Roman Catholic. He still believed in the veneration of Mary and the saints. He still offered the sacrifice of the Mass as a priest. He still believed in purgatory, as he mentioned numerous times in the document. He still submitted to the authority of the Pope, Leo X at the time, and you heard in the document how many times he was trying to defend the Pope's honor and prevent injury to his reputation. He still believed that the Bishop of Rome was the vicar of Christ on earth. When Luther wrote the 95 Theses, he was a good Catholic, and he was being a good Catholic. He was being a good Augustinian monk and a good professor. What he took exception to was, as we just heard, the sale of and the theology surrounding these indulgence sales. He didn't write this document to start a revolt. He certainly didn't want to start a new church. This was meant to be a call for debate, for discussion, to shed light on the abuses of those who were claiming to represent the Pope with the hope of reforming the church that he so loved. Luther was a good pastor, and he had concerns for the people that he was serving, legitimate questions that he needed answers to, and that he was willing to debate in order to get those answers. Now, given how things sort of transpired, and the fact that we now have the name Lutheran on our own church signage at OR, you can surmise how things turned out for him. In any case, that's what I've got for you today. Please do let me know your thoughts and comments in the comment section down below. And also make sure to spread this out. Share it with everybody, Lutherans and non-Lutherans alike. Next week, we'll actually get underway with the foundational documents for us as Lutherans, as found in the Book of Concord. This has been Firehose. We're shutting it down. Now, folks, if you don't have a church home, first and foremost, I would suggest highly that you check out the LCMS churches in your area. I can almost guarantee you that there will be plenty of options for you. If, however, you are here in the Milwaukee Metro, especially in the Wauwatosa area, feel free to join us. We've got services on Saturday night at 4:30. We've got 2 services on Sunday morning, one at 9 and one at 10:30. Whichever one you go to, you will hear Christ crucified and resurrected for you. Now, until the time that we see each other again, keep the faith. I hope to see you in church.